Hello, my loyal subjects, and welcome! I've come up with a new idea for PBR. Not necessarily any change in the implementation, or to be specific, no change in the visual quality, just a much easier way of doing it. I've been an idiot. I'm just going to be completely clear on that. I have made a major fuck-up with this. Now, in my defense, I have not been able to find anyone else who does PBR stuff for Blender, so I'm kind of running blind here. And moreover, I don't think anyone's ever implemented PBR in a node editor, so I'm gonna sort of use that as my excuse, but I've still been a dumbass, because I found a significantly easier way to implement it. It's essentially using the subjects of my physically based Fresnel video in its entirety. That's it. Okay. First of all, I just want to show you what the new method is, real quick. Let's drop down a mix shader. You know how I hate it on these things? Yeah, I found a method that actually uses them. Oh, God. So anyway, let me drop down a custom Fresnel node. Notice it has roughness, and it also has specular. I should honestly call this, like, F0 or something, for when it's facing you directly. If I preview this, you'll see what it is. If I increase the roughness, you can see it's the physically based Fresnel we made earlier. You can crack it open, it's just the same old, with the, ignore the mixes here, they actually get turned into a value at the end. Blender handles that really well. And that's kind of where the key came in here, and one thing I didn't actually know is that Blender handles color conversion really, really well. Kind of color to value conversion, like the best that I've ever seen it handled, and I'll show you that in a second. But I just want to show you how to do this. I'm going to make the diffuse orange just so it shows the effect a little bit more. I'm going to add diffuse and glossy, and we need to make this white. White and, in this case, smooth. Plug them in, as you would normally set up a Fresnel setup. Oh, God. And this is why I'm an idiot, because this is a physically based shader, and it's flexible. Like, literally, that's the one weakness of it. Previously was that the Fresnel node didn't have the physically based math behind it to handle things like roughness. That was really the only thing it was missing. And again, I kind of reinvented the wheel on that point. And while that taught me a bunch, yeah, this is a physically based shader. Now, there is one difference, implementation-wise, which is that it uses grayscale energy conservation, but I'll go into that when I actually go into the implementation, which I'm turning over to now. So, I've switched my scene, I have cleaned up some elements of it, and we are ready for implementation. I'm moving my mic a bit. So, here, let's actually add some stuff. First of all, I am using Node Wrangler as always. Control-Shift clicking nodes then becomes the way you preview them, and it's amazing. So let's go in here, and let's add our basis, our layer weight node, because custom Fresnel requires it. It's how much it's facing us, as always. Next, let's go in here. Let's add a math. We're going to put it to the power of something. Not logarithm, power. We're going to put it to the power of 5, because 5 is a very, very good value. And I'm in a 5-ish mood this week. So, next, let's talk about the opposite of it. For example, point 2 shrinks the dark spot as much as 5 expands it. This is referred to as rooting a value. You can trace this out in nodes by doing a 1 divided by operation. So it's 1 divided by whatever your root is, and that will, and put that to the power. So anyway, if you're not aware what that means, let's make a node out of this, and maybe I'll explain it a little better. So we have a value there, we have a value here, and I'm going to name this one root. Think of the root as the opposite of powering something. It does the exact opposite as what power does. To a curve, that is, to a 0 to 1 curve. So in this case, it'll do the opposite to our Fresnel. And I'm just going to name this root. So anyway, we're going to need this for roughness. And you'll notice it's root 01, because I've already got one in this scene. So, let's preview that. You can see it shrinks the dark spot. even though they have the same value. This one expands the dark spot, this one shrinks it. They shrink it and expand it by the same amount. This is important because we need to actually perform some fancy math on roughness. Next, let's go in and let's actually add a color blend, a color mix. In this case, we want to say that this white area around the edge, where this area is white, we want to have full reflections, and where it's 0, we want to have 0. Now notice when I'm doing a color mix here, we don't actually want to think of this as color, we just want to think of this as a value, because, yeah, it's not entirely. We're just using a mix because Blender does not have a lerp linear interpolate. It's a bit like a color mix for values. It doesn't have a value color mix. Or value mix, rather. So anyway, this, if we look at it, allows us to define a lowest value. Basically, what is the, basically how dark can our Fresnel curve be? Does it need to be really bright? Does it need to be really dark? This is important for certain physically based reasons, such as most non-metallic surfaces have about 4% reflectivity. And then we need to mix it again because we need to put in one more effect, roughness. The more rough a surface is, the less Fresnel it has. So, as our roughness goes up, and be aware we're not putting facing in there. I was just showing that for previewing purposes. But if I had a little roughness value, for example, plug that in, the higher it goes, the more that Fresnel disappears. And this is why we needed this root. You see, the root makes it so that it doesn't disappear right away. It actually disappears slowly. So you can see right there, it gets a lot of, it gets a lot brighter when we click it to 0.1, but as we continue to click it, it gets less and less bright with each click. This is directly proportional to how much our edge reflection happens. This is kind of the math behind it. I know it's a little bit fiddly, but hey, shit happens. So anyway, there, at full roughness, there's no Fresnel whatsoever, which is very, very good. And boom. Let's jump back. Next, we're going to need an F0 value, a lowest reflectivity. Basically, whatever this center value is. Simple enough. I'm just going to name it F0, or like that. This is basically if it's facing us directly, what color is it? Or in this case, what value is it? Because remember, we're working with values here. We're going to pump this into a mixed shader. So, boom. That's physically based. You can see here, I'm going to walk you through the steps again. Create a curve. Create this edge rim, starting with facing. How much is it facing us? Make it significantly sharper around the edges by a value of 4 or 5, or somewhere in between. Those are good physical values. We then mix in a base value to give us a little bit more control. What is the minimum? What's this black? What value is this black area directly facing us? Then we go into roughness and we say, hey, the more rough it is, the less of that edge reflection we get, and the closer it gets to whatever our lowest value is. And yeah, that's our Fresnel node in its entirety. Now specifically we need to modify the curve of that so that there's kind of it's not just a straight line, otherwise you get kind of cartoony looking materials. But yeah, this is the Fresnel node. Drag the whole thing, hit Ctrl-G to turn it into a node group, and let's start playing. In this case I'm holding Shift to add a relay by clicking and dragging. And then I'm dragging from the group input to that relay to connect it. You don't need to do that, I'm just doing it because I don't feel like losing any of my connections. Boop, and boop. So, simple, to the point. Next, we need a F0. We're also going to need a roughness. Now in this case, I don't want to have both of these hard-coded to only do a value of 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expose that. And we're going to call this one Fresnel Power. It's going to default to 5. I'm also going to set this F0 to something useful. It shouldn't be... F0 should be between 0 and 1. Its full value, we're going to set it to about 0.04, which is about 4%. 4% is a good value to have because it's honestly the value you need to remember. That's the value for non-metallic surfaces, and is honestly the majority of surfaces are going to be that reflective. So now we've got a custom Fresnel node. It's amazing. I'm going to call this one, I'm going to put a little T at the base for the purposes of tutorial. And I'm going to call this one Fresnel. And boom, we have a special Fresnel node. If I preview it, you can see I can increase my lowest reflectivity, and I can also increase the roughness, which makes that edge reflection dim down and eventually disappear. I can also adjust the power of it, and that will be directly proportional. Gives you nice proportional values. It's physically based Fresnel. I know, I'm an idiot for not seeing it earlier. Also, I'm going to modify this a little bit. This output color here shouldn't be a color. It should be a value. I'm going to remove it. I'm just going to connect it to a value so that it turns into one. Then I'm just going to connect the color up. Now I want to talk about why this works, because it, in theory, in most cases, wouldn't. I'm a programmer, I'm used to there being problems, and when I find out there isn't one and they've solved it, I'm usually very surprised by it. So here's what I want to explain. Let's drop down a color, not a color mix. Let's drop down just an RGB value. And I'm going to drop down a math node. The reason for this is I want to turn it into, I want to see how it converts over to a value. We're going to add nothing to it. And we're just going to preview that. So, first of all, you'll notice the gray color in here is the gray color over here. Seems to map perfectly, right? White is white, and that's great, right? Well, what happens if I add a color in there? You'll notice the color changed. Same value. It's not just taking this value from hue, saturation, and values I was expecting it to. It's actually taking into account the visual brightness of the Fresnel, or in this case, not Fresnel, of the color. It's taking the visual brightness of the color. Why does this matter? It means energy conservation is not going to be horribly, horribly borked. It will actually work, which I was not expecting. Their color conversion's really good. If you don't understand why that's important, I'm not surprised. Basically, I assumed there will be a problem where there wasn't one. I was not expecting that to work, because in pretty much all the cases that wouldn't work. Anyway, this is our custom Fresnel. It works. Hit that F button so it saves. And yeah, anyway, here's your custom Fresnel. This is all that is required. Let's talk about actually building a shader out of this now, going back to that original, because now we have like physically based Fresnel and it will work fine. So, now, let's build a shader. I'm just going to delete this and use my other one. Actually, no, we'll use the tutorial one. Fresnel. It's literally what you've probably been expecting. Plug it into a mixed shader. It will just work. It'll turn it into a physically based shader. It's amazing. So you plug it in. You still need to remember the rules, though, because Specular hasn't changed its behavior at all. We need to make sure the roughness is the same as our material, and we also need to make sure that our value is 1, as in it's just white, blinding white. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Because, when we add it, you'll see we get physically based Fresnel in this regard. As for example, if I were to take a value over here, if I drop down a value, because I just want to be able to change these both at the same time, if I can manage to plug these in, like a dunce. As I decrease this, you can see they are perfectly proportional. It's basically fixed Fresnel. Like, as I increase the roughness, the Fresnel disappears, right? It disappears at the proper rate. It disappears very quickly, and then dwindles off more slowly near the end, which is exactly what we want. And, yeah, this is kind of what we get. Now, what we blend that into is largely subjective. For example, if I went and, not glossy, if I want a non-metallic material, I can just plug a diffuse in there. And you can see here, we're already getting something that's very, very good looking. If I make it like orange or something like that, this is a non-metallic material. If I increase the roughness of it and make sure they're all using the same roughness value, again, you get very, very good values. The shading looks nice, it looks authentic. It's a physically based shader, but it's a modular one that you can easily expand. So yeah, you could literally just replace the Fresnel node. This is actually something I want to put forward to Blender as an improvement, because if you had like a physically based Fresnel node, like that would be physically based shading, just done. Like a super Fresnel node, and then you're entirely done. Physically based shading, boom. Voila. Add a refraction node. And of course, if you're mixing between how refractive an object is and how reflective, guess what you get? You get a glass shader. As I decrease this, you can see we get a glass shader. Looks quite nice. If I add a color to it, you'll see that it still maintains that. Boom! Glass. Physically based glass. If you want it to... This is more plastic than anything else, because plastic is surface tinted generally. Plastic has its tint on the surface, while glass, most of the time, has its tint actually in its volume. So you go to volume absorption, and you add that into volume, and then you give it a color. So for example, if it absorbs to, kind of tints its volume to a blue light, you can see just the ear is like very transparent, while the thicker areas are more colored. That's closer to what you'd see on actual glass. So again, like there's physically based, there is physically based glass. Boom. Easy. Easy peasy. So anyway, as you can see, it's just so much easier to work with this. And again, it's so simple. If we want to add a metallic shader, we don't even need a mix shader for it. We just need a mix color, because we can just look at the mix and say mix color. And one thing I am going to say, however, is that when you're mixing metallic goes from whatever color you define for it and full reflectivity. So set the facing 0 value to 0 so that we can define, like, okay, the center color is this and the outer color is this. It's kind of how we did things before with the specular, but anyway. So we plug that in there, and we make this white again. So if we look at this, it's essentially what we did internally with the colors, except the difference is we're doing it with an actual color here. So again, there's your for now. There's your metallic shader. And, if I make this red, for example, you can really see the grazing reflections. And then as I increase the roughness, you can see it fading off and looking quite nice. But again, that's the entire thing. If I want to make a clear coat shader, which is kind of a car paint style, gets more reflective, has kind of this clear non-metallic coat over a rough metallic coat. You'll see this on a lot of car paints or whatever, where they have like rough flaked metal, and then they'll have some over clean sheen over it, some clear coat over it that's actually partially transparent. And if we plug this in, for example, and make this completely smooth, you can actually see it. Now it's very faint here, so I'm going to make this colored real quick. Oh yeah, we also need this to be 4% since it's non-metallic. The layer over top of it is non-metallic. But you can see car paint, boom, car paint. It's got this rough underlayer, and then it's being added, we're adding this layer over the top. Now, what I personally did was I kind of got sick of having these 3 separate nodes that I had to remember all the time, so what I'm actually going to do is Control G, and hook up this, and I'm just going to make a specular layer, like a layer of specular color over it. So I'm just going to call this one specular layer. In this case, I'm going to put a T at the bottom because I've already got one of those. So anyway, need to expose some values as well, like, for example, the normal, so that the normal is exposed. Oh yeah, I also need to go in here, because the layer weight has a normal. This will allow you to use things like normal mapping and so on. Make sure that you plug those up. Anyway. But again, you're just going to hook stuff up as you will, and so again, you can now make significantly simpler improvements. So here, it's basically just, taking a mix shader, making it slightly simpler to use. So, boom, we have a specular layer. A specular layer. So we're saying, hey, we want this with a specular layer over top of it. Simple enough. And yeah, if I wanted to make a non-metallic material with this, I could just add a diffuse shader, and in my case I made tons of shaders with it very quickly. So it's like, okay, let's make this blue. And let's make it rough. Yeah, so now we have this kind of blue rubber. And again, it's that easy. It's so simple. And I feel super dumb for having wasted a lot of time with that method. But of course, the previous method was required before I could find out this new method, so... Anyway, this is a significantly faster way to make physically based materials, and honestly I think it would be practical to implement in Blender from the get-go instead of having like a really, really complicated method for it. It's the same math under the hood, does all the same things, it just takes advantage of Blender's resources a little better. Again, it's a bit of a weird technique, though. Just having a way better Fresnel node, and it's just something that, for something so mathy, I didn't think the solve would be so simple. Anyway, hope that was informative to you guys. I know this is a bit of a long video, and I know it's a little bit rambly, but hopefully that informed some of you. Just got back from work and I'm kind of tired, so anyway. Sorry if the video is a little bit rambly, but hey. Have a great day. Blender things. Make Blender-y things, and honestly, try making one of these. Like, just go in, make yourself a physically based shader, and send me a screenshot of something that you made. If you don't have like a Dropbox or something, you can actually, I recommend Lightshot. Lightshot's a really good way to just kind of capture a screenshot and then just link it online. They just allow you to hit print screen and then just capture your screen, and you can post them online really easily. They don't last forever, but it's really quite cool for sharing quick screenshots. Anyway, send me some screenshots. I want to see. If you don't have time or don't care, fine. Whatever. Cool. But just make cool things. That's all I ask. Anyway, peace out. I'm gonna go probably drink stuff and sleep.